Hey guys, welcome to another Lifestyle of Eating podcast. I'm your host, Nick Tognetti. Today I have a very special guest and dear friend, Haylee Colannino. Did I say that right?
You got it.
Awesome. And you're out of Tampa, Florida, is that right?
Yep.
And Haley is we actually had a previous podcast on her page. How do we even find that podcast? How do they get to your page? What does that look like?
Yep. So my podcast is called the Girls Fuel Podcast. We can link that episode in the show notes, or they can just search your name and it'll pop up.
Absolutely. Yeah, that podcast was to this day, that was top three favorite podcasts I've ever done. That was super informative and a blast. And so Haley is an RD. She's a registered dietitian in Tampa, Florida. We've gotten, pretty close as friends and just, bouncing things off of each other, helping each other out with different things and everything else. I want you, Haley, to kind of introduce yourself, talk about, I think you're 29 now. Is that right? We're about the same
Yep.
age. Yeah. So talk about how you kind of got into this and what that journey's looked like for you. And then obviously we're going to dive into a very hot topic, all things carnivore diet, kidney function, this, that, and the other. But kind of give the audience a little bit of how you got here where we're at right now.
Definitely. So like Nick mentions, my name is Haley. I have a online business, just like Nick. Mine is called Girls Fuel LLC. I primarily work with women who are struggling with chronic health issues, the inability to lose weight, feeling like they're doing everything right, but not seeing the results that they deserve, maybe have been bounced around from doctor to doctor where no one can really figure out the root cause of their symptoms or what to do about them. But it didn't start that way. So I'll give you the kind of long story short. I have been coaching in some capacity since about 2017. I have, my undergraduate degree in nutrition, and I became a personal trainer actually before that in like 2015 because I personal trained all through college, kind of always knew what I wanted to do. After college, I hired a coach myself and got into bodybuilding. So it was then that I discovered that I could take what I was doing in person with my clients in the gym. And then, obviously you start to talk about nutrition with those in person clients. And I was also working at a bigger gym in New Hampshire at the time where I would run nutrition challenges and education programs, and that's really where I fell in love with coaching and was able to build my own business for the first time in 2018 online. From there, I worked for a company for 3 years. And at that point, I was mainly doing, your typical macro coaching, reverse diet, all of that stuff. But as I was in my master's program at Florida State, I started learning more and more about internal health. I took endocrinology classes. I took a lot of different sports nutrition classes because that's actually what my master's is in, is sports nutrition. So for a while, I thought that I was going to go be a dietitian for a football team or something of that nature, UFC fighters. But I realized that that really wasn't my calling. So as I was coaching online and learning more and more about internal health, I went through my dietetic internship. I've taken so many courses online, like I'm sure you have as well, from mentors and things of that nature. So it's almost 3 years ago now, I started Girls Fuel. I left the company I was working for because I just realized that if I wanted to branch out of this macro coaching space and do more of the functional, help people with gut health and hormones and interpreting lab work, I needed to make a change and venture out on my own. Ever since I started studying nutrition in 2013, I wanted to have a private practice. Once I realized I wasn't going to go the sports route, I was like, I want to have a private practice. That's what dietitians call a business, right?
Right, right.
So started
Well,
Girls Fuel,
oh,
put that.
well, real quick, I want to ask you that on something. You had said that you needed to branch out in order to kind of learn a lot of the stuff that you're wanting to learn. So, as a registered dietitian, you have plenty of schooling underneath you. Did the stuff that we always talk about and certain things with labs and X, Y, and Z, do you not get that in the school to become a registered dietitian?
No, absolutely not. No. So while like I did my undergrad and then I took a few years off from school. Traditionally, back then, it's different now, the requirements. You would go undergrad right into your DI, your dietetic internship. I didn't do that. I took a few years off. I was again working at a gym. I also had a paid internship working with the football team at my undergrad, which was something that I really enjoyed doing, teaching the guys how to nourish their body and track their macros and make body comp changes.
Yeah.
So a lot of that time was spent doing self-study. you know, going to lectures, going to seminars in person and studying, reading on my own, going down rabbit holes, which I'm sure you're very familiar with as well. So then by the time I got to my master's program, I was already coaching. That program did teach me more, right? Because I was able to choose electives like the endocrinology, which was a good kind of introduction in a way to the deeper science behind everything that I was learning in some of these more surface level like coaching classes. But no, you really don't learn a ton in your dietetic internship in terms of like the functional stuff. Like you
Right.
learn
Yeah.
about calorie needs, but a lot of it is based on the clinical setting. Now there are a lot more internships or at least graduate programs that do have options for functional, which I think is amazing. I would love to like teach
Yeah.
in one of those, but at the time, no. I took endocrinology, and in my dietetic internship, I worked in hospitals, so I learned more about how they read labs and how different that is from like how I was reading labs. I in my dietetic internship, you know, you get to a point in your clinical rotation where you're just like a functioning dietitian. They give you your client, the patient list for the day, and you go to the rooms and you do the education. But I kind of got in trouble at first because I was like flagging so many people for labs that were high in my eyes, but they were like, that person has cirrhosis. Like, we know their liver's messed up. Like, there's nothing you can do. And I was like, okay. So that was interesting. And I think back on that sometimes, and I do miss that clinical setting because I think if I wasn't doing this now, I would go clinical. Because it is really, really interesting. But again, it's just like one interaction. You're not really making a big difference in that person's life.
Right.
But with the company I was working for, I was starting to take more gut health cases and help other coaches with their clients, but that wasn't what they marketed towards. It was just like if a fat loss client was having gut issues, they would pull me in, and I had my own roster. So I realized that if I wanted to pursue this fully and be more of a functional dietitian, I needed to go on my own. And I started Girls Fuel. And that was, a few years ago now, and it's been absolutely incredible. I have an assistant coach and a little team behind me, and am honestly, if you're a coach and listening to this, I feel like I was reminiscing on this the other day. I'm in a place where I've always wanted to be, right? Where I'm very
Uh-huh.
confident in my coaching, confident in my team. I attract the right clients, and it's just been really fun. And obviously I've made so many friends and connections like Nick along the way with the online space. So that's kind of the skinny of it. I'm an open book. So if you do have more questions on that journey, can totally talk offline.
I always knew, and just from the name of your business and seeing your clients and everything else, I always kind of had the assumption, well, yeah, she mostly does women. I didn't know that you did fully niche down to only women, though. I think that's awesome. I think that's a great thing. I think niching down is wonderful. But I didn't, I guess I had never literally heard that to like seal that understanding for me. But it doesn't surprise me. Like I said, I've followed you and known you long enough to where I go, yeah, I mean, I think all of our clients are probably women, but that's pretty
Yeah.
sweet.
We have a couple men, more so like referrals, like husbands of our clients, but
Right.
mainly for GI, right? Like I can do men's physique. I've prepped male competitors before, but at this point, like I usually will refer a man out unless it's strictly for gut health. Like I have a couple right now that we're working on getting them off a proton pump inhibitor or
Yeah.
liver issues, right? And stuff like that. But usually it's only by referral that will take men.
Yesterday for my new book, and also just being as a pastor, there was a ministry out here that had me come in and guest speak, and I was in there for like 4 hours yesterday, and right when I walked in, they had, kind of seen my physique. I was wearing a shirt that kind of complimented it and so forth, and said, "What do you do?" and blah blah blah. And I said, "Oh, I have a nationwide functional nutrition practice." And they one of them had asked me, "Hey, look, my friend's standing right here. I already know she's going to ask you, so I'm just going to ask you anyway. What certifications do you have?" And or she goes, "What schooling or whatever?" I can't remember exactly what she said it, something like that. And I said, "Well," I said, "not as much as you think." And I said, "Not as much as you think for somebody who has a doctor on his payroll and got this and this and this." And I go, "I didn't go to college. I dropped out of college, after my first semester. I go, I do have certain functional certifications, but I mean, I don't flaunt those because I don't really think they hold much weight, no matter who they're learned from or whatever. But it's interesting how you said you don't really learn much of this in that. And I said, you know, what's crazy is they are starting to have functional doctors now. But even the functional doctors, like when I have people that come to me that say, yeah, I was working with a functional doctor and this, that, and the other, they still don't know how to use GI maps. They still don't know how to write 5R protocols. They still don't know how to do the stuff that we talk about. And so I still even say I don't really have I still don't have a whole lot of like weighty respect for that aspect of the functional movement because I also think that there's so much conventional mind thought in that functional doctor space that is it truly functional? Like me, functional means literally what is the root of your problem? That's for me, that's the definition of it, you know? And I still think in the functional doctor world, it's still super conventional by nature. I think it's just so new, right? And so I think the self-study at the end of the day, yeah, I do think the self-study is at the moment, maybe not in the future, but at the moment reigning supreme for us getting to where we've gotten and hopefully getting to where we're going to get to and everything else, you know. So that's that's pretty awesome that, you know, you had learned everything you learned. And I'm sure everything you learned in school, there are nuggets and bits and pieces that you took from it that you still use to this day. It's super
Yeah.
awesome, no doubt about it. Because I know multiple RDs. My one of my god sisters is an RD. But you know, she also just doesn't know the functional aspects that like we know and everything else, you know.
It's so different. Like I have a lot of friends that are RDs that just do the clinical route, and it's like we went to school for, it's like we have different backgrounds, different educations, but the RD, it does hold a lot of weight.
Yeah,
It
oh no, it does
far
for
as the
sure.
business perspective goes. And I will say, especially since I mentor a lot of, I would say newer coaches who want to get into the functional space, I think a big thing that helped me, and I'm sure you too, was the self-study, but also having that baseline knowledge.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
I personally am not really someone that learns things very easily. So like going through my undergrad, I really struggled with things like the nutritional biochem and the chemistry with like remembering everything. I have a horrible memory at times, but grad school, I it's much smaller classes. My program was fantastic. And I did have a lot of professors that noticed how I
Yeah.
was learning differently, right? Like I have ADHD, I have anxiety, I probably have autism. I've never been diagnosed formally, but I just didn't get things the way that other people did. So the nature of grad school being so conversational instead of just here, read this, take this test because you're in a lecture hall of 300 people, that really, really hit home for me. And I took grad level nutritional biochemistry where a lot of our classes were roundtable discussions. So in grad school, especially, I learned how to read research. I did research. I worked in a lab. So it definitely helped in that regard because I think that that's something that's missing in a lot of the newer generations of coaches is they're just looking for quick answers. They're just looking for a blog for functional medicine for kidney disease because it's out there. But what I'm finding with my, I would guess you could say students or mentees is they don't understand the why enough. They know how to slap a protocol. They know how to do a 5R, but they're not understanding why are we recommending these supplements? You know, what are the mechanisms? What other systems is it impacting? I think a lot of that came from schooling, but also how deep into self-study that we had to be when we were coming up in the space because there weren't as many resources.
Right. No, that's good. That's really good. And you know, so one of the reasons I wanted you on here was because being an RD, the title in and of itself, regardless of whether someone's good at what they do or bad at what they do, doesn't matter. The title in and of itself, which you're good at what you do, by the way, so you don't fall in the other category, but it holds a lot of weight. And so, you know, um, I have a podcast, another podcast that's already, you know, on my lifestyle of eating Spotify and Apple of the carnivore diet, my thoughts on it. I kind of go more surface level though, but my thoughts on it, my opinions on it, and this, that, why it's sweeping the globe, why it seems, notice I said seems to be helping people with gut issues, seemingly so, and any other issues or whatever. And so I'll bring all those kind of back into this video and everything else, but I wanted to have people be able to hear the genuine opinion, whether agrees or disagrees with me on the carnivore diet as an RD, and not only as an RD from what you learned in school, but just what you've learned over the last 10 years and where you are today in your experience. I'm not going to go pinpoint a specific section of the carnivore diet. I want to leave it more surface level and let you elaborate on what you've seen with it, what you think about it. Do you buy into the craze of it? What are all things carnivore? Hit it.
Definitely. So I'll preface this by saying that I live a bit under a rock, right? I don't pay a ton of attention to trends because usually I quickly will form my opinion and disregard. But I do know carnivore diet has become extremely popular in the chronic health space. And basically, what the chronic diet is it's a diet that involves only eating animal products. And people do it different ways based on their beliefs and needs, but
Yeah.
thinking meat, fish, eggs, dairy for some people, not everybody will do dairy.
Yeah.
And that can be really harmful, especially thinking about gut health. So the reason why a lot
What can be harmful? What can be harmful?
only eating
Oh,
animal
okay. Yeah,
products.
I just
And
want to
I'm gonna
understand.
I'll
Yeah,
get
go
into
ahead.
why, but
Go ahead.
from my understanding, the reason that people are doing this, it depends, right? There's people are doing it to help with autoimmune symptoms or autoimmune diseases because it's thought that we're reducing inflammation in the body by reducing or lowering the load of common allergens or things like lectins and certain fibers. People will also start this if they have a lot of food sensitivities, which in that
Right.
regard, I do think that it can be helpful for a period of time. I can honestly say, in like Nick mentioned, almost 10 years of experience, I have never recommended that somebody do it, but I have had clients come to me on it and we've, reversed them out of that. Because when somebody, if you're dealing with a food sensitivity, you are likely going to be reactive to a lot of specifically carbohydrates, especially if we're thinking about dysbiosis or bacterial overgrowth. The
Sure.
presence of added amounts of fiber may not sit well with you. And especially if you're in a place, and I've been there myself, where you just have symptoms no matter what, you can't figure out what's causing them. There are no clear triggers. You do enough research, you're going to find that the carnivore diet pulls out all potential triggers, right?
Yeah.
So I see why people would do it for that reason, for the gut issues, but people also will do it for weight loss and metabolic health. I mean, if you're basically protein fasting, obviously you'll get some dietary fat in there, but it's taking low carb, no carb to the extreme.
Well, let me
There
ask you on that. You had said, with the elimination diet, yeah, it's kind of a, temporarily of helping not hit certain things that maybe certain carbs or FODMAPs may be messing with if you have dysbiosis or SIBO or whatever it is, right? So in that right there, because that's the thing, a lot of people will eat it and go, oh, my symptoms went away. Here's the thing, my question is always, whenever I hear that, I ask them this because I've already drawn my own conclusion to this, but I ask them, I say, are you curing your gut issue or are you avoiding the issue? Which one do you think it is? Do you think it's the avoiding this? Because, I mean, are you really fixing the SIBO and gut dysbiosis through that? Or are you just not feeding certain foods that you know are destroying your gut because you have a leaky gut, you have H. pylori, you have these other things? In that case, to me, that's an avoidance. You're actually not fixing anything.
I agree that it's avoidance, but I think most people don't know that. So
Yeah.
just like everything else that we're going to talk about, if you're considering doing the carnivore diet, why? Like what is actually wrong? What is the root cause? Because odds are, and this is, what I preach in my practice is if you find the root cause, there is a way to go about healing while keeping your diet as balanced as possible. And yes, it's going to be unique to each individual, but we almost never have to go to these extremes where we do something where we avoid major food groups or something like an elemental diet where we're mainly relying on shakes and things like that. It depends on how reactive you are, but there are a lot of negative sides of avoiding all of these issues for long-term gut health, right? All of the low fiber intake, you're not only starving your good gut bugs, but you're risking not being able to properly manage the overgrowth, right? It can
Yeah.
be exacerbated in multiple ways, and you're really kind of tanking the diversity of the bacteria, which is associated with higher risk of IBD, inflammatory issues, so irritable bowel disease, which is technically an autoimmune
Right.
condition, and then increased inflammation because protein, as we're going to talk about when we get into kidneys, is the hardest thing for you to digest. And
Yeah.
odds are, if you have a gut issue, you have low levels of stomach acid, you have low enzyme production. So your body isn't making sufficient amounts of the things that actually degrade and break down protein into amino acids. So thinking betaine HCl and pepsin, proteases, and all of those different things. So by using this as another band-aid solution, even though it may yield improvements in symptoms, it's not fixing anything, at least not in what I've read or not in what I've seen. Again, people might experience improvement. So that's where maybe, yeah, maybe you do have a lower carb diet for the period of time that you are dealing with GI issues. And that's something that I'll do from time to time, is pull carbs way down or do like a specific carb diet where carbs are only coming from certain foods. But the goal is always to have your diet be as diverse as possible when healing your gut, because it's a balancing act between killing off, regulating the bad, and making sure that we're feeding the good. We're getting enough short chain fatty acids. We're getting enough fibers and prebiotic foods to feed our good gut bugs. But it also, eating a highly processed meat diet, which I think a lot of people will take just like keto, right? There's a way to do keto and have it be healthy keto, but there's a way to do keto and you're just eating bacon and mayo.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think the
Yeah.
same goes for carnivore, where some people are eating such large amounts of red meat, even maybe processed meats and things of that nature. And that can really increase inflammation in the body, especially thinking about high cholesterol, irritation of the gut lining. Obviously, it puts a lot of strain on the kidneys because kidneys are primarily involved in the circulation, excretion, regulation of proteins in your body. And buildups of proteins in themselves, especially if you have a leaky gut, which we can get into, can exacerbate or worsen autoimmune like conditions.
For sure. No, that's really good. That really kind of goes hand in hand with everything I say. And I kind of explain why I think a lot of people have a lessening of symptoms while they go on those things. And number one, like we said, it could be because, hey, you're having less sugar and carbs, and so especially bad sugar and carbs, but you probably didn't get there in the first place by eating brown rice and watermelon. You were probably eating garbage carbs in the first place. But so yeah, you're feeding less of the SIBO bacteria and this, that, and the other. But at the same time, by doing that, having no FODMAPs, having no prebiotic fiber, you're also starving out the good bacteria, like you said, which therefore, even if you're lowering bad bacteria and good bacteria, if you lower the good bacteria, bad bacteria will ensue regardless. Because there's nothing to keep it in check. It's kind of like I always compare it to a prison. You have to have a certain amount of guards per prisoner, or a certain amount of, that ratio has to be right. Otherwise, you lower too many guards, the prisoners ensue and just go crazy and do everything. You've got to have guards there, enough of them to keep these in check. And so the other thing too that I always talk about is in the United States, and I can personally attest to this moving to California lately, living in the United States, the healthiest foods you can put into your body, obviously, are fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, fermented foods, prebiotic fiber foods that feed literally the gut microbiome. And so the sad thing is that our healthiest foods are the exact foods that are obliterated in pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. And so every time people load up on these healthy foods, what happens? They're eating so many pesticides. They're eating more than you would ever eat on a carnivore diet. Because a carnivore diet, you can go grass-fed, but even if you don't go grass-fed, at least you're not just pummeling in all of these pesticides and herbicides. So they stop eating that and they equate the fruit and fiber intake with, oh, this is what's messing up my gut. Not at all. That's literally the definition of what feeds the gut microbiome. The gut microbes cannot eat anything other than prebiotic fiber. So I've always said that I think that it's how covered our foods are and this, that, and the other, because moving out to California, even eating organic at the store, like you still have plenty of residues from herbicides and pesticides. Moving out to California, 95% of my food is farmers market. And so I get to talk firsthand with the farmers right there in front of my face. Hey, how do you do your soil? How do you do this? How do you do that? There's only been one time where any of them have ever said, "Oh, by the way, Nick, this doesn't have anything on it. This and this doesn't have anything on it. But these apples here, I did spray." And he shows me what he sprayed. He goes, "I sprayed this on it because I had bugs on it. But if you want to wash it off, this is how you like." There's so much vulnerability and honesty there where I feel like I don't have any of that going in my system. I've already felt radically healthier in 6 weeks. And that's kind of been my thing in the United States, is that Why is it that all over the world people are thriving? Even the poorest cultures on the planet, Mexico, Ecuador, Costa Rica, the poorest places on the planet, what are they eating? They're literally eating three foods. They're eating butternut squash, black beans, and corn tortillas made right there at home. And it's one of the five blue zones. They're the longest living people on the planet, and they're eating those things. Why is it that the United States is the only one having this problem? I really am very firmly committed to the thought process that it is because of our healthiest foods are covered in nonsense.
Yeah, I think that that's a large part of it for people. And just thinking about, especially seeing so many women that I work with, just thinking about the lifestyle here too. I mean, I know we talked about this when you were thinking about moving to another country or even like stays in other countries. Like the hustle culture here is so hard. And it's not only in work, like parenthood, just the way that people operate their day. Like other countries have a siesta. They nap in the middle of the day. To me, that sounds amazing. And
Right.
sometimes I do because I own a business. But like, the idea of we have to be doing things all the time. People are drinking copious amounts of caffeine and alcohol and sleeping 3 hours a night. So all these things, and especially for us ladies out there, and even some men, we have a hefty dieting history. We've been trying to lose weight our entire lives. We're overtraining, we're under eating, and all of these things are compromising our immune system and compromising our body's ability to fight toxins.
That's right.
And I'm curious, what the farmers told you about how to clean the veggies. Because I know I personally, when I remember, honestly, I'm not perfect, will
Yeah.
do a mix of white vinegar, water, and baking soda.
Well, because of so like the one I was actually at his house. I was literally hanging out at his house, and he said, "Hey Nick, go out there and grab whatever you want." So I grabbed, a bag of these onions, Swiss chard, I can't remember what else, and then some apples. And the apples were the thing that he said, "Hey Nick, I just so you know, I did have to spray this," and he shows me what he sprayed. And even the I don't know if it's technically called an herbicide or pesticide. It's one of the sides, whatever. Um, it's an all natural one, but then you still want to wash it off. You don't want it necessarily going in your body. And he had said, because of the amount that I sprayed and because I just sprayed it recently, for that one, all I had to do was literally put it under hot water and just make sure with my hands, I just scrub it really,
Yeah.
really well. And that comes off that easy because like I said, it's not sprayed with two, three, four, five things or heavy layers of it. That's the fortunate thing is that even if they do spray something like that, it's usually super light and they'll be very honest with you and tell you, hey, this is the only one you got to worry about with that. That's because of this or this, that, or the other. And then the big thing is their soil. One of the things that I ask every week, because we have like multiple farmers markets where we're at Salinas, Monterey, Carmel, and I will literally ask them, hey, what do you do to enrich your soil? Because obviously soil depletion is the problem with so much of our food. And they go, oh, well, we do this, we do this, we do this. And they do the same exact things that we do to our soil in Iowa. So I'm like, okay, great, this is awesome. So there's 9,000 farmers markets all across the United States. You, depending on where you're at, you may have to drive 40 minutes, an hour to really get quality ones. But that hour, for the sake of what you're really going to get from it, to me, it's so worth it. I think that everybody should at least try to start implementing it, even if you do it slowly or whatever. But I think that it's critical. Um, but yeah, no, that's my real, thought process behind it all. But like you said, I don't think a lot of people know. They just recognize, oh, I had a symptom and now I don't. But then eventually you start eating it again and you get it back. And that's because, like you said, you never fixed it functionally. You never fixed the root of it, right?
Yeah, and a lot of it too is like you mentioned earlier, like if it's a SIBO, if it's a bacterial overgrowth or even like a parasite, that's what's causing the symptom. It's not necessarily the food. And that's what I'll try to remind my clients of, because the last thing that we want to do is have our digestive issues cause a poor relationship with food, which it
Yeah.
unfortunately happens. It's very, very common that we become afraid of certain foods. Like I personally used to be petrified to eat dairy because it would give me gas and indigestion and just bloating. And I have a lot of clients that are horrified by a lot of foods because of the history of what they've associated those foods with. So the big thing is, getting to the root of what's causing these things and just doing the best that you can to choose foods that agree with you for the time being. And if that is mostly meat, okay, but you need to be actively trying to figure out what else is going on, because I don't know about you, and I like meat very much. That is not sustainable for more
Oh,
than,
yeah.
a short period of time. Obviously, you can get meat almost everywhere you eat out, but it's not sustainable from a health perspective. It's not sustainable because that's not fun. Like you want to be able to eat birthday cake with your kids or whatever it is. I think a big part of it is people don't know how to dig deeper. And that's where, the functional medicine piece does come in. So doing something like a GI map stool test, or if you have a doctor where they can take your insurance, asking for like a SIBO breath test or an H. pylori breath test, and getting the proper tools in your toolbox is really the key to healing and having the most diverse diet as possible. Because as much as you can tell yourself, I can live on this carnivore forever, like I enjoy it, do you really want to eat like that
For sure.
forever and have to be so cautious everywhere you go and live in this crazy routine of only consuming? Like, to me that sounds disgusting. After a few days I'd be like, that this is gross. Like, you're probably getting the meat sweats, you're down regulating kidney function and causing a lot of stress internally, where if we just invested a little bit to figure out what the actual root cause was, you
Yeah.
could get back to a much more normal diet.
Not only that, the buildup of atherosclerotic plaque in your
Yeah.
artery. Yep. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So what you brought up something interesting, which I was going to ask you about was so dairy. So like I've generally, for the most part, not only stayed away from it for myself, but for my clients. But because just like a lot of our foods, I don't consider our dairy here real dairy. Dairy that I recommend, and I do actually recommend this if you can find it, if it's near you, is I always kind of my thing has been this, 70% of the world falls under this category, however we want to call it, but lactose intolerant. Well, the thing is, when you heat or pasteurize dairy, you actually burn off the enzymes that are built into the dairy to digest lactose. So we're all technically lactose intolerant. Why? Because we need the enzymes that come really with dairy. And so my whole thing has been this. If it comes to milk, raw milk, as long as you know the farm, you know the cows are, A2 Jersey cows or well-kept cows, everything's clean. If you do, I think raw milk is the best. And then the same thing for me has gone with cheese, raw cheese. If you're going to do butter, raw butter. But I've always been, especially the last year, I have been one that has really been more a fan of the raw, simply for the fact that that to me is to me it falls under the concept of the whole is better than the sum of its parts. So like if I have a peanut butter jelly sandwich, if I make the sandwich together, it's awesome. But if I have a piece of bread in this hand, a spoon for the jelly in this hand, a spoon for the peanut butter, it's just not, it just, I got to bite this, then do this, and it's not the same. I picture the same thing with dairy. By heating it, you burn off such the quality of the stuff that it needs. So my whole thing has been, yeah, I generally do teach stay away from dairy unless it's raw dairy. But I'm curious on your perspective on that.
I do have a very different perspective, and I'm not
Yeah,
saying either is right or wrong. The approach that I just generally take with my clients and like my own life at this point
sure.
is you can only do so much, right? And I think about a lot of my clients where they are watching their budget. So maybe shopping at a farmer's market every week isn't realistic, or driving an hour to find somewhere that has a cow with raw milk or whatever it is isn't necessarily the most realistic. And I
Yeah,
feel like I've also spent so much of my life fearing food and being avoidant of certain things that I just don't do it anymore. So
that's good. That's
as a
good.
functional practitioner, I'm a little bit in the camp of do what you can, wash your fruits and veggies, buy organic when you can, but I still eat like Publix, which is our grocery store in Florida, Publix brand Swiss cheese, right? I will still eat Greek yogurt that, is flavored and not the best for you, because I don't really like to preach that perfection where, the only way to eat is whole foods, where I agree with that. If you can do that, great. But I'm a little bit in the camp of something is going to kill me. And
Yeah,
if
yeah,
it
yeah.
is because I'm enjoying my diet and doing something that's sustainable, then I'm kind of okay with it. As long as, again, we're controlling what we can control
Good.
and
No,
finding that perfect balance, right? Like if I have a client coming me eating McDonald's, I'm not going to tell them go to the farmer's market and buy raw milk. I'm going to be like, all right, like let's
sure.
slowly make these changes, see what feels sustainable for you, and go from there. So that's, my take on it. If the
Oh,
person
that's
does
good.
want to go to that like more extreme and say we're not doing any processed foods, we're not doing any of that, because I'm not going to lie to you and say I don't eat processed foods, right?
Yeah.
Like my breakfast is almost always like a breakfast bar because I have a very low appetite in the morning and not a lot of time. So I think it really is like thinking about that 80-20 balance of is 80% of what you're putting in your body every single day nourishing you, safe for you, doing you justice. But 20%, like sometimes we have to eat the processed, slightly processed Swiss cheese. Sometimes we need
Yeah.
the breakfast bar. Sometimes we need to go get ice cream with our kids. So I'm very much in the camp where it's like, you need to live your life, but
Yeah.
do your best.
No, it's the concept of, hey, do 80% in the fresh food section, but 20% go into the aisles and grab, a couple things.
Yeah.
And honestly, even though I am a little bit more of an extremist and I'm fine with that, I do also recognize that the reality is in the United States, if we even lived by that 80-20 rule, we would drop our disease rate by 70%.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like 80-20. I mean, I don't even know if people can say that they do 20-80. Honestly. Like, so it's so bad to where I do think the 80-20 rule would save so many lives and not only help heal a lot of your issues by nature. I think that in and of itself would be super preventative. Do I
For
think that you can be more preventative and more reversing it by going further? Sure. But I think the 80-20 rule is super preachable. I think it's very relatable. I have no problem with that. So, and plus, the thing is too, is that people like you, me, that's the great thing is that we don't do everything the same. But a
Mm.
lot of times it's like there's 7 ways to skin a cat, right? A lot of times though, our results are almost the same, if not identical, right? Okay, hey, you had a gut issue, now you didn't. But Haylee did it this way, Nick did it this way. Guess what? Both of them have proven things that work. And the guy that really mentored me in this space pretty heavily for a while, he used to say the same thing when he was teaching me. He used to say, Nick, you may come up with your own protocols and on this, that, and the other, and that's fine. He goes, as long as you come up with a folder of clients that have won and it's worked, then nobody can really argue it. Like, and won and worked at the root level, not at the symptomatology alone, right? And so I'm like, no, that's really good. So I think people get a really good glimpse from this about really the reality of the carnivore diet, kind of where the misconceptions are and so forth. And so my question goes kind of into the next thing because you were bringing up how the number one organ that really gets hit, generally speaking, is the kidneys when it comes to protein. Sure, somebody could argue the heart, especially when it comes to saturated fat or whatever, but really just from an all-around perspective, it's the kidneys. Your BUN is directly related to amino acids, which is from the kidneys. Your creatinine is generally directly related with your creatine, phosphates, which is going to, convert into creatinine, and your eGFR is obviously, telling us how well you're filtering your creatinine and everything else. So protein is very heavily involved with that, as you said. And I know on our last podcast you had discussed because I had brought up, these levels in depth, and I had said how 1 in 7 US adults have chronic kidney disease, whether they are aware or unaware, and how prevalent it is here. And you had brought up how, you watched your grandmother and grandfather, reverse kidney disease. And I've personally watched it in my own practice with my own eyes, under my own hand with God's help. And so I want to talk about not only do I want to end up getting to reversing chronic kidney disease, I want to hear the testimony of literally what your grandparents did, what you watched them do, but how does the carnivore diet, let's start there. How does the carnivore diet affect the kidneys maybe in a negative way?
Definitely. So, like you kind of mentioned, and we can see different kidney markers in our lab work. And this is mainly what your doctors are looking at. And as practitioners, this is mainly what we're looking at. Because for a lot of people, you have to get really deep into kidney disease to actually show symptoms. And I think that's why, for a lot of people, kidney disease ends up being deadly. Like it's one of the leading causes of death in our country. It even happens in animals. Like my cat, Vincent, has had recurrent UTIs. He has kidney issues. And both of my male cats are on special diets for kidney disease. Our kidneys are very, very vulnerable organs because they play such a major role in our body, right? They regulate blood pressure, fluid volume. They also are a big player in protein digestion. So when somebody is struggling with their kidney function, and typically to assess like if you're having issues with your kidneys, if you're in acute or chronic kidney disease, we're looking at that GFR, that glomerular filtration rate. And this is actually something that I did learn a lot about in my dietetic internship. More of these medical things I did learn a lot about because you have to learn all the clinical stuff and a dietitian's role in it. But GFR measures how well your kidneys are functioning, how well they are filtering things, right? Because it's a measure of how much blood passes through the glomeruli, or however you say that,
Yeah.
which are these basically like tiny filters within your kidney. How much is passing through each minute, right? So it's also the first step in urine production because our kidneys also play a big role in urine. And that's why one of the first signs that somebody might be having issues with their kidneys could be urinary changes, frequent
Right.
urination, painful urination, UTIs. So we have to think about the 5 stages of kidney disease, and
Yeah.
doctors' view on GFR in labs is significantly different than ours, which
Right.
is kind of scary, right? So I like to see GFR 90 or above.
Right.
That is, to me, normal to increased kidney function and minimal damage, right? But then, we get into stage 2, stage 3A, 3B as GFR decreases, right? So
Right.
even something as high as a value of 60 to 89 is decreased kidney function. And we kind of go from there. So with my grandparents, and as far as where protein plays a role, if your kidney function is compromised, protein is going to build up in your body because it cannot possibly be excreted. And then we get protein in the urine and we get a whole slew of issues, from there. Um, but with my grandparents, they are, I mean, they're old, right? They're at this point, this was a few years ago with the kidney disease, they're mid 80s, right? They are fantastic. They are honestly my biggest advocates in my journey to becoming an RD. They treat me like their personal doctor. They message me and I'll send them supplements or recommendations, and they really like advocate for their health, mostly my grandmother. So when they started getting their blood work back and their doctor was like, "Hey, you guys have stage 4, which is almost as bad as it gets. Stage 5 is basically kidney failure, right? So for
Yeah.
stage 4, your GFR is very low. It's like 15 to 29. So they both, mainly my grandmother first, came back with that stage 4 kidney disease. And the doctor, like most doctors will give you a list of things to do and not do. But my grandma took it upon herself and used the internet and went down Google rabbit holes. And they met with a dietitian and she talked to me. And the biggest thing that they did was they did a low potassium diet. They were already doing pretty low protein just because, they were in their 80s and their appetites were low to begin with, which low appetite can actually be a symptom of kidney and liver dysfunction. But potassium is one of, and phosphorus in more advanced stages of CKD can be limiting to the kidneys, right? Because they're harder for filtration to happen. There can be imbalances with potassium and sodium. But basically what they started doing was avoiding foods that contained more than 200 milligrams of potassium per serving. So
Hmm.
foods that are higher potassium, bananas, oranges, avocados, tomatoes, certain nuts, certain veggies, potatoes, yogurt. And before they ate a very liberal diet. Like they grew up, they're Jewish. So, they eat a lot of bread. They eat a lot of, my grandpa eats a lot of ice cream. So basically the first thing my grandma did was she just transformed their diet. They just started limiting potassium. My grandfather at the time also had type 2 diabetes. So they started eating more whole foods. They switched out, his typical cheesy spaghetti for
Right.
lower fat meats, for less tomato sauce, because tomatoes have potassium. And I
Top two,
remember,
top two
talking
reasons,
to her.
top two reasons for kidney. It's interesting you said that top two reasons for kidney disease is blood pressure and diabetes.
Yeah,
So that's the reason why, like, so the doctor in my practice, he gave me access to an app thing that you can go in and you can type in CKD and it will tell you the medical world's first lines of defense or whatever. And the first lines of their defense is actually some form of blood sugar regulation medication, whether it's Ozempic, semaglutide, insulin, whatever it is. So anyway, that's interesting. But that was maybe a major reason for his CKD in the
for
first place.
him. Yes, for him, but not for my grandma. She didn't have any issues with any of that. She just had old age and weakened kidney function. So, and
Oh,
it happens, kidney function declines with age, which
sure.
is why it's so important to stay on top of it now. But my grandfather was on insulin and all of that, taking his blood sugar all the time. And at the time, my grandma, I don't think she realized like how big of an impact her changes were going to make. But within like
Yeah.
a year,
Mhm.
they print out their blood work for me every time I come over. They live down South Florida, so it's just an easy drive. I'm there every few months, right? They have
Yeah.
their blood work printed. They have a whole folder from their doctor visits, and they like me to look over it. And I'll usually recommend more functional recommendations for them. So, every time I visited, they would have new blood work, and kidney function was improving. So they cut out all potassium. That was the main thing that they did, and they transformed their diet. I actually taught them to eat more protein because they were not eating a lot at all, and they're in their 80s again, so bone mineral density is getting lower. They both had falls and some issues there, but really what we did with them, and this was mainly her, I didn't really intervene in this. I've intervened in more things as they progressed, but that was mainly them. They reduced potassium, they focused on keeping sodium lower, they learned how to make balanced meals. So they weren't just eating like a bowl or a plate of carbohydrates. They were more so big snackers or grazers. They would actually pair proteins and pair veggies. And that's really all they did was they balanced their diet. I wish it was more complex than that. And as the years progressed, now this was probably like 3, 4, 5 years ago, they're coming to me and they're like, hey, I have a UTI. Hey, I have this. Hey, my bone density was this. So I'm giving them, the appropriate probiotics and the appropriate renal support and giving them more suggestions for their diet. But at that point, that was really all them. They just totally transformed their diet. My grandfather's glucose and A1C returned to normal. And now they're at a point where they eat potassium again, but my grandma is still very aware of what is elevated and what's not. Like I remember for those few years when she was dealing with it, every time I'd go over, she would be complaining. She's like, "Oh, I can't have this because potassium, and I can't have this because potassium, and this has too much sodium, blood pressure." And for a while, it was hard, like for them, because potassium's in a lot of things. She definitely took it to the extreme, and she tried to avoid potassium. I actually taught her once her kidneys were back in like a stage 1, 2, that it's okay to have some, but you probably don't need to eat a whole bag of potato chips or use the whole can of tomato sauce in your spaghetti. They still eat a very liberal diet. But that was the biggest thing for them, was balancing blood sugar, reducing sugar in their diet as a whole and processed foods, focusing on lower potassium and more whole foods and more balanced meals versus just eating like carbs alone.
Yeah. No, no, that's really good. One of the things that So, there's a handful of things with kidney disease now that's starting to spark up. And one of the reasons I know so much about this was one of the things that my uncle had, who just passed away, was, 9 years ago, his kidneys were failing and he had a heart attack and blah blah blah. And now, granted, this was really coming from, he was Mr. California, top four Mr. America. This was coming from the gear
Bodybuilding.
and the bodybuilding lifestyle that's involved in getting to that size and doing this, that, and the other. So I always tell people, you have to take out the obvious. Take out the low-hanging fruit. Stop taking all the over-the-counter pain pills. Stop taking all your
Mm.
opioids. Stop taking the steroids. Stop doing, but once you do that, okay, then from a lifestyle perspective, yeah, generally speaking, generally the top two reasons, not always, but the top two reasons are blood sugar issues like your grandfather, and then blood pressure, and then if just something else happens. Well, what happened with me was I ended up actually getting into stage three personally. I have not actually shared this on a public level yet, so this is my first time actually sharing this right now in this video. I ended up getting to stage three, and the reason being was because I was a very, very big bodybuilder. I was going pro in 2017. Well, then after that, I went vegan. I was vegan for years. And, although I got into some of the best shape of my life, but as a byproduct, yes, you do eat less protein. And quite frankly, I think it's the proper amount of protein. I don't think that you need 200, 300, 400 grams of protein. I mean, as big as I am, I eat about 100 grams of protein a day right now.
Are you
And
kidding?
I'm
It's
not kidding at
amazing.
all. I might go to 120. Like if I decide, hey, like on the weekends, like I'm having some wild caught fish for Shabbat dinner. I mean, it's funny you said your grandparents were Jewish, so I do Shabbat every single week.
Yep.
But I don't know if they were practicing, in that, doing that, but that's awesome. But yeah, no, so I really don't. I just eat, I eat like 3,000 calories a day. I have tons of, whole food, plant-based. It's a very wide variety. But when I really add up my protein intake, yeah, it's probably about 100, maybe 110. And so anyway, I was doing that for years before. Now it's more balanced than it was then. I was learning how to do the vegan diet. I was learning how to do all that. And although I don't consider myself vegan now, because I'll still eat wild caught fish a couple times a month, or maybe go out to a steakhouse, get a good steak on the weekend or something. But yeah, from a day-to-day basis, I eat pretty much a whole food, plant-based diet, generally speaking. And well, anyway, long story short, uh a while back, a couple years, after I went vegan, I decided, hey, I'm gonna kind of get back into bodybuilding a little bit. And I started eating meat again. I put on 30 pounds of muscle, all my old muscle. It was all muscle memory.
Wow.
That's all it was. 30 pounds in 2 months, in 60 days. 30
Naturally,
pounds.
no testosterone.
Well, I mean, I've always run testosterone replacement
Okay.
therapy, but only to a level that keeps my levels, above 800, just a normal man, just like that, never on a steroid anabolic level in that sense. And so, um, everybody in the gym was like, dude, what are you doing? And I go, I kid you not, I literally just started eating, meat and higher protein again. Like that's all I did. Well, putting on that much muscle, even though it was all muscle memory, it stressed the heck out of my kidneys and my liver. And my function immediately went down. And not only that, because I had so much more muscle building and I was training so much harder, I ended up having a mild case of what's called rhabdomyolysis, which not a lot of people are really knowing about right now, but it's becoming more prevalent as we're getting more outdoor gyms and more marathon runners and different things. Rhabdomyolysis, is, which I'm sure you know, but for the public, is it's basically muscle breakdown and myoglobin, a protein within your muscles, it leaks out into the bloodstream. It's a red protein, which is why a lot of people will start having like really dark urine and this, that, and the other, maybe even red urine. And myoglobin immediately, the second it touches your glomeruli and your kidneys, it damages them like this, like this, like this. And I
And
ended up
that's
getting
life,
right. Yeah, well, yeah. Well, and
like
so
baby.
that's what one of the doctors that was telling me. He goes, hey, depending on how severe this is there scarring or whatever, that you can stop the stuff from getting any worse, but we don't know if we'll be able to reverse it. Well, long story short, I went back to my whole food plant-based diet and it started reversing completely. And so there's so many different reasons, and which rhabdomyolysis leads to CKD. It leads to chronic kidney disease, and by definition, in the medical world, by definition, chronic kidney disease is diagnosed by three things: either one, proteinuria, do you have protein in your blood? Hematuria, do you have not protein in your blood, protein in your urine?
Yeah.
Hematuria, do you have blood in your urine? Or the third one is your EGFR dropping to a certain level for 3 months or more. Well, this happened for me for over a year. By definition, I had stage 3 CKD. And so I got to learn all these different things about IgA nephropathy, rhabdomyolysis, CKD. I started getting all these different cases. And then sure enough, the MD that's in my practice, he's a doctor of pediatrics, internal medicine, and integrative medicine, but he's also a nephrologist, which is a kidney specialist. So really coming under him and he's a functionally minded doctor. He's an integrative doctor. And so learning so much from him on these things and working these cases, it's been tremendous. And I've just been mind blown at how many people in the United States. Like I said, 1 in 7 US adults. That's a unfathomable number right there. But the big thing he and I used to talk about, like when this initially started happening, and we were talking, he said, hey, you know what, Nick, like I really recommend that you do go back to your whole food plant-based diet right now. If you want to do like a probiotic yogurt and have some like clean dairy like that, he goes, have that as well, but I would really drop off, all the animal products. Let's do everything we can, at least in our power, to try and, see what your body's going to respond to with this. And sure enough, within it was within 6 weeks my body just started responding like this, like this, like this, because the stress came off. And so it just goes back to our whole conversation with carnivore is, not only is your protein intake spiking, but it does become very tough for your body to digest all that. You're putting so much weight on your kidneys. In fact, when my uncle, when he had his kidney failures about 9 years ago, I'm 30 now, I was 21 then. I was getting ready for Mr. Texas. So yeah, about 9 years ago, the kidney specialist he saw said the top four reasons that he sees in the United States for kidney failure is oral steroids, not injectable, specifically oral, NSAIDs like Advil, ibuprofen, over-the-counter pain pills, This one actually blew my mind. Energy drinks.
Oh shit.
Energy drinks. Yeah. You're probably like, crap, I do a lot of those.
No, I don't do a
No,
lot
this is
of them. I
nothing.
used to. I used
I
to.
did too. And I know people that will have three a day,
Oh
right?
my
And
gosh. No.
and so it the energy drinks, and then the fourth one was too high of protein. That
Yep.
was the
Do that
top
in
four
clients
reasons.
even.
Yeah, that was the top four reasons that even he gave as a nephrologist. And so that really, really spoke volumes to me. And then, like I said, when you really understand blood work, which I really just nudge the audience to go back to that podcast you and I did a couple months
Mm.
ago. We went so deep into every nuance. Like I explained every nuance of how you read kidney labs and liver labs and your AST versus ALT and how AST is actually a kidney marker. It's not just a liver marker. ALT is actually 10 times stronger than AST when it comes to concentration within the liver and all these different things. That podcast was so rich from you and I on that concept, but um it just goes to this whole thing that, at the end of the day, the carnivore diet, not only is it an avoidance of certain things, but in the short term, are you going to notice kidney issues? No, but you cannot judge a nutritional thing off of anything short term. And that's the problem that I think we're having today is that we're trying to say which diet works the best off of a study that was done for 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. The only thing that you're going to really be able to judge a genuine nutrition thing on when it comes to lifespan is by judging it after generations, like 60 years, 80 years, 100, 200, 300. And that's the reason why for me, and maybe I'm a little too strong on this, but whatever, it's my conviction, is why I think the Blue Zone's regimen of life, stress reduction, getting body movement. I didn't say exercise, but just moving your body, walking here instead of drive, whatever it is. Generally speaking, a whole food plant-based diet, eating, wild caught fish or something like that 4 or 5 times a month, but in smaller portions. I think that that is the healthiest regimen. Why? Because it's the only studied diet ever in history that generation after generation it's produced the same exact results. And so can something else produce that? Maybe, but we still don't know unless we study it that long. And so I think when we come across these carnivore things of that nature, we don't have any 10-year, 20-year, 50-year, 80-year, 100-year studies, and you can't judge things in conclusiveness off of 6 months. As you know, just like any medical literature, there's no way you can study it off of one person, and there's no way you can study it off of 6 months. It's just not accurate.
No, for sure. And I think, at least the way I practice, a lot of it is pulling from research, but also pulling from anecdotal evidence from
Right.
what I see in practice, what people above me have seen in practice, but also just understanding the mechanisms of how these things actually impact the body. And I think that's the biggest thing from a coaching perspective that we have to understand is okay, like this may help this person's symptoms, but what is it doing long term? What other things is it throwing off by being in this state for so long, but also thinking about, the dietary changes and eating more plant-based. If you're somebody that's struggling with GI issues, specifically more of that bloating, more of that indigestion, constipation, eating healthier may make you feel worse. And that, if nothing more, is the biggest mind F that there ever was, because you're thinking, hey, I'm doing everything right. I'm eating all the fruits and veggies. I'm doing all of these things to be active and to be healthy. But why am I feeling worse and worse? So
Right.
that's where you may jump to an extreme, such as the carnivore diet. But
Yeah.
before you do that, even, without thinking of the repercussions of that on your internal health, you need to figure out why that you're having these symptoms. That is the biggest thing. And if Western medicine has failed you, if your doctor has just told you you're fine, eat more fiber, you're fine, drink more water, that's where diving into a functional practitioner's space can be really helpful. It can be really expensive as well, right? Obviously, some
Yeah.
functional doctors are, some aren't. We're actually in the process of figuring out more about insurance right now for my practice and how we can take that, how we can work with insurance companies, because I think that is definitely like an access to care issue for some people
Sure.
where just
Sure.
going from doctor to doctor is easier. But hopefully none of this scares people when it comes to the kidney stuff. But I think it's just building that awareness of finding the balance that like works for you. That's really important too.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, like for example, in my practice, actually, literally last night, I was just reviewing a client's blood work and GI map. She's a newer client. And the first 2 weeks, um, the diet that I had her on was the blandest of foods. Like when it comes to veggies, hey, let's just stick to green beans, or just let's just find like simple basics right now because her gut was devoured. And it's like, oh man, these healthier foods are really messing with me. And I said, look, the healthy foods are not the issue. I go, there's a gut issue that until we know what it is on the GI map, we're not going to know how to attack it. And so it seems on the surface, oh, these foods are bad. But then you know what? I get her GI map back. She doesn't have a parasite. She has a parasitic pathogen, which are which are
Yeah.
disease causing. She has dysbiosis. She has H. pylori. She has SIBO. She has an overdriven immune system. Her pancreas is not producing enzymes. Her eosinophil is through the roof. I mean, literally loads of stuff. And I'm like, and yet we're blaming the green beans. We're blaming the blueberries. Like, come on, are you serious? So the same thing, the other day I had another client where now actually she's totally past her gut issues. We ran her 5 hour protocol. She's awesome now. But when she first started with me, we were trying to figure out foods for her and this, that, and the other. And she literally was going to the restroom 10 times a day because it was just draining through her.
Yeah.
Get her GI map back, no Akkermansia mucin, which is debatably the most important probiotic in the gut microbiome. H. pylori, SIBO, gut dysbiosis, all these different things. And so I say, look, like you said, eating healthy may make you feel worse at first, but it's not the eating healthy. Not only that, the one thing I have noticed too, some people that have no gut issues that will come to me, the moment that I start putting them on a more whole food, plant-based diet with wild caught fish, grass-fed meat, things of this nature, they start feeling terrible at first.
Mm.
Major headaches, can't get out of bed, this, that, and the other. And I tell them all the time, I go, these are telltale signs of detox symptoms. Your body is starting to release all of these endotoxins. After about a week, they feel phenomenal.
Yeah.
But those first couple days, that first week is so tough because their body is starting to release all of these processed foods. And not only that, it's a sugar withdrawal type thing too. They're not eating all these processed foods and this, that, and the other. So I think that is the thing is that as practitioners, number one, we need to know somebody's lifestyle, like my intake forms. You've got to tell me your whole lifestyle of what you've been doing before.
Yeah.
So
Same.
I warn people. I say, hey, listen, these symptoms may come, this may happen, this, that, and the other. You've got to let people know that that's very reasonable and it's normal. Don't be alarmed thinking that something's wrong. It's not that something's wrong, it's that you're on the right track. It was like you and I talking the other day, or a little bit earlier, about business and certain stressors of it. It's like, hey, those are like the birth pains or growing pains of business. It doesn't mean you're on the wrong track. It means that this is actually proof that you're going in the right direction. But there's certain pains that come along with that journey in the initial so that you can, get to where you need to get, right?
No, definitely. And I'll also warn clients about certain things. And that's where having support is helpful. So that way, if you have something that flares up, you can reach out and we can talk to you about, hey, is this part of the plan? Is this something that we need to dive into deeper? But really, if you can, at its core, get your body working the way that it should be,
Yeah,
everything is going to improve, from your gut health, from your cognitive function, from any chronic pain that you're in, any skin issues, right? Any food sensitivities. It really is just like peeling it back and trying to stop jumping on these like quick fix trains based on what you've seen on the internet, or, seen somebody talk about on TikTok or whatever it is.
that's right. No, that's good. Well, man, Haley, this has been like a wealth of knowledge. Not only a wealth of knowledge just in general, but with the authority of somebody who does wear the badge of an RD, I think is super beneficial and such a blessing to people because you get to marry the conventional or clinical thought with really, the reality that we've got to have functionally and everything else. And so, man, thank you so much for coming on and spreading a wealth of knowledge. I have so many other things that I want to discuss with you, maybe in the future with mold. I know that's a huge hot topic right now, and
Yeah.
there's just so much more for us to have and everything else. So thank you so much for just being willing to share all your knowledge. And how can people uh just go ahead and tell, how can people find you like on Instagram and get all your, podcasts? How can people find, the wealth of knowledge and posts that you put on your social media and everything else?
Yeah, no, thank you. This was really, really a fun conversation. We've been trying to make it happen for a little bit now, playing calendar tag. But yeah, so best way to find me, Instagram is where I hang out most. It is Coach Haley _ RD. And then my podcast is the Girls Fuel podcast. We also have a Facebook community where we do live trainings and just try to build a safe space for women to share what's going on with them, to learn, to ask questions, and have other people that, understand what they're going through. So that's
Yeah.
where I'm at.
No, that's awesome. And guys, just so you know, it'll be in the comments section below or the summary section below. Haley's name is spelled with a two E's at the end, not an IE, not a Y, anything like that. So Coach Haley, I'll be sure to put that in the summary. You'll see that below, guys. Give her a follow. She gives amazing content continually. If you want, join her Facebook group and everything else. But once again, Haley, thank you so much, and I look forward to when we can get on another one soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Well, hey, listen, stay tuned, guys, for the next episode, and I hope that you enjoyed this one. Have a good one.